In the dim light of a cramped apartment in Chicago's South Side, Emily stood frozen, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. The air was thick with tension, the kind that clung to the peeling wallpaper and the worn linoleum floor of their rented home. Her husband Jake stood across the room, his muscular arms wrapped tightly around Rachel, his childhood friend whose smug smile cut through Emily like a blade. "There's nothing between us." Emily Jake barked, his voice rough as gravel, his dark eyes flashing with contempt. "Rachel's like my sister. We grew up together in this neighborhood, running these streets since we were kids. If something was happening, would you even have a chance with me?" Emily's throat tightened, her hands trembling at her sides. She wanted to scream to demand why he always chose Rachel over her. But before she could speak, Rachel cut in, her tone casual yet dripping with condescension. "Emily, I get it. You're book smart, went to college, all that," she said, tossing her dyed blonde hair over her shoulder. "But you don't understand the kind of loyalty we have from growing up on these streets. Jake and I are like siblings. Think about it. Would I have married Zach if I were into him?" Her lips curled into a smirk, and Emily felt a hot flush of humiliation. Rachel's words weren't just dismissive, they were a deliberate jab meant to make Emily feel small, like an outsider in her marriage. Jake's grip on Rachel tightened, his gaze never softening as he turned back to Emily. "Stop projecting your uptight ideas onto us," he snapped. "Rachel's husband is a deadbeat. Look at what he did to her, beat her up again. I'm taking her to the hospital. Give me $500, then go to the market, get an old hen, and make some chicken soup for her later." His tone was commanding, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to demand money from his wife while holding another woman in his arms. Emily's stomach churned. She'd been the sole breadwinner for 2 years, and her substitute teacher's salary stretched thin to cover rent, utilities, and groceries. Jake, the leader of the Iron Hawks, a local gang that ran protection rackets and controlled the neighborhood's underground economy, hadn't contributed a dime. Every dollar he earned went to buying rounds of drinks for his brothers or bailing them out of trouble. Emily stood rooted to the spot, her mind racing. She remembered the early days of their marriage, when she'd believed Jake's strength and street-savvy charm would shield her from the world's chaos. 3 years ago, he'd saved her from a thug who'd cornered her in an alley, his fists and fearless swagger driving the predator away. She'd fallen hard, defying her parents, both high school teachers who valued education and stability, to marry him. But now that hero was a myth, replaced by a man who treated her like an ATM for his gang. Her eyes flicked to Rachel, who squirmed dramatically in Jake's arms, her voice suddenly soft. "Jake, maybe I should go to the hospital alone. I don't want to cause trouble between you two." A flicker of concern crossed Jake's face, his usual stoic mask slipping. "No way," he said, scooping Rachel up effortlessly, her slight frame cradled against his chest. "Brothers are like limbs. Women are just clothes. Rachel, you're family. No matter who I marry, my brothers come first." His words landed like a punch to Emily's gut. She felt her heart crack, the pain sharp and raw, but beneath it a quiet resolve began to stir. She wasn't the naive girl who'd married Jake anymore. A year ago, a car crash caused by one of his enemies had nearly killed her, leaving her hospitalized and broken. In that moment of clarity, staring at the hospital ceiling, she'd vowed to rewrite her life, no longer a doormat, no longer a victim. "If you don't want to make the soup, fine," Jake added coldly, not even looking at her. "Just give me the $500. Emily's voice came out flat, steady, despite the storm inside her. "I don't have any money." Rachel gasped, her eyes wide with mock shock. "Come on, Emily, that's not right. Jake risks his life out there for the Hawks, and you're saying you can't even save $500. No offense, but that's not how a wife supports a man like him." Jake's jaw twitched, but Emily cut him off before he could speak. "Support him," she said, her voice sharp now, her anger breaking through. "How can I save when Jake hasn't brought a single dollar home in 2 years? It's my salary keeping this place afloat." Rachel's face flushed, and she buried it in Jake's chest, clearly embarrassed. Jake, caught off guard, said nothing, his silence admitting his guilt. Without another word, he turned, still holding Rachel, and stormed toward the hospital. Emily sank onto the sagging couch, her body trembling with exhaustion and rage. But as the door slammed shut, relief washed over her. She hadn't gotten pregnant with Jake's child this past year, a small mercy that felt like a lifeline. Their worlds had never aligned, hers rooted in books and dreams of a stable future, his in the violent, ego-driven chaos of the Iron Hawks. This was her breaking point, the moment she'd stop letting Jake and his family drain her dry. Her heart still ached, but a fire was kindling inside her, a determination to reclaim her life no matter the cost. Emily sank onto the sagging couch in their Chicago apartment, the echo of the slammed door still ringing in her ears. The room felt smaller now, its peeling paint and cracked linoleum a mirror of her fractured marriage. Her hands trembled not just from the sting of Jake's betrayal, but from the weight of 2 years spent pouring her heart and savings into a man who saw her as little more than a resource. Her chest tightened, a mix of grief and fury swirling within her. She wasn't the same woman who'd married Jake wide-eyed and hopeful. A year ago, a car crash caused by one of his Ironhawks rivals had nearly taken her life, leaving her broken in a hospital bed. In that sterile room, staring at the ceiling through waves of pain, she'd faced a brutal truth: her marriage was a trap, and she'd been complicit in her suffering. That moment wasn't reincarnation, but a rebirth, a mental awakening that forced her to see Jake for who he was, and herself for who she could become. She closed her eyes, memories flooding back like a bitter tide. Emily had grown up in a quiet suburb north of Chicago, raised by parents who were high school teachers, their home filled with books and dreams of her becoming a scientist. She'd been the good girl, studious and sheltered, never one for fights or chaos. 3 years ago, that world shattered when a local thug, part of a rival gang, took a liking to her. He'd cornered her in an alley near her part-time tutoring job, his hands rough and his threats chilling. Just when she'd thought there was no escape, Jake appeared, a streetwise hero with a leather jacket and a fearless glare. He and his Ironhawks, a gang that ran protection rackets and controlled Chicago's South Side drug trade, beat the thug senseless, saving her. To Emily, Jake was a knight. His raw strength and defiance starkly contrast with Emily's orderly life. Against her parents' tearful protests, she'd married him believing he'd shield her from the world's dangers. But the shield was an illusion. Jake's life was a storm of violence and ego. His Ironhawks were a tight-knit crew that thrived on loyalty and street cred. They ran the neighborhood's underground economy, extorting businesses, dealing small-time drugs, and settling disputes with fists or worse. Jake's charisma held it together, and his reputation as a tough but fair leader made him a local legend. Yet that life spilled into their marriage. Emily's days were marked by chaos, gang rivals splashing dirty water on her as she walked home, bricks crashing through their windows, shards of glass once slicing her arm. Jake prioritized his brothers over her safety, each time dismissing her fear as weakness. "It's just how things are," he'd say, more concerned with saving face than stitching her wounds. Her heart ached as she recalled the nights she'd bandaged herself alone, tears mixing with blood, wondering where her hero had gone. Worse was the financial toll. Jake never contributed to their household. Every dollar he earned went to treating his Ironhawks to beers at the local dive bar or bailing them out of jail. Emily's teaching salary, meant for her future, paid for everything: rent, groceries, even Jake's parents' medical bills. Her dowry, a $5,000 gift from her parents for their marriage, had been her safety net, but Jake had bled it dry. He'd come to her with sob stories about his brothers needing help, a sick kid, a repoed car promising they'd pay her back. Blinded by love, she'd handed over the money, believing in his loyalty. But those promises were empty. When she'd needed help, when rival gangs targeted her as Jake's wife, not one of those loyal brothers lifted a finger. Her dowry was gone, and with it, her dreams of stability. The memory that cut deepest was 6 months ago, when she'd been cornered again by Jake's allies. Two of his so-called brothers, drunk on power and cheap whiskey, had tried to assault her at a seedy club where Jake's debts had landed her as payment. She'd fought them off, barely escaping, but the betrayal burned. Jake had called her sister-in-law to their faces, yet they saw her as disposable. That night she'd sobbed in a dark alley, realizing love had made her a fool. The car crash weeks later was the final straw, a rival's revenge that left her hospitalized, her body bruised but her mind awake. She'd vowed then to stop sacrificing herself for a man who'd never choose her. Sitting on the couch, Emily's grief gave way to a quiet fury. Her fingers traced the edge of the coffee table, her mind racing. Jake's world of violence and loyalty had nearly destroyed her, but she wasn't broken yet. The Ironhawks might rule the streets, but she had something they didn't resolve. Her parents had taught her to fight with her mind, not her fists, and she'd use that now. She thought of Rachel, always at Jake's side, her sisterly bond a thinly veiled manipulation. Emily's heart hardened. She wouldn't let Rachel or Jake take another piece of her. The crash had given her a second chance, not to rewrite the past, but to reclaim her future. She stood, her legs shaky, but her eyes clear, a fire kindling within her. This was no longer about surviving Jake's world, but about leaving it behind. The morning sun barely pierced the grime-streaked windows of Emily's Chicago apartment, casting long shadows across the cluttered living room. She sat cross-legged on the floor, a worn leather suitcase open before her, its contents a painful reminder of her eroded dreams. Her fingers still trembling from last night's confrontation with Jake, and Rachel closed around a small, dog-eared ledger. This wasn't just a notebook. It was her rebellion, each page a meticulous record of every dollar Jake had siphoned from her dowry for his Iron Hawks brothers. After the car crash that nearly killed her a year ago, Emily had started this ledger, a quiet act of defiance born in the hospital's sterile silence. It was her way of reclaiming control, of proving she wasn't the naive wife Jake thought her to be. With her heart pounding and a mix of fear and determination burning in her chest, she knew it was time to act. Emily's dowry, $5,000 gifted by her parents for a stable future, had been whittled away over 2 years, handed over to Jake's gang members for their endless emergencies, bail money, medical bills, or bar tabs to keep the Iron Hawks' loyalty. The gang ruled Chicago's South Side, a network of small-time hustlers who extorted local shops and dealt drugs in back alleys. Jake, their charismatic leader, held sway through a mix of charm and violence, his name enough to make shopkeepers pay up and rivals back off. But Emily had paid the real price, her savings, safety, and pride. The ledger listed names, dates, and amounts: $500 for Tommy's court fines, $300 for Mike's sister's surgery, $1,000 for Rachel's emergency. None had been repaid despite Jake's promises. Her stomach churned with betrayal, but her resolve hardened. She wasn't just collecting money, she was reclaiming her life. She stood smoothing her worn cardigan and tucked the ledger into her purse. Her reflection in the cracked mirror showed a woman with tired eyes but a set jaw. The South Side streets were no place for a former teacher's daughter, but Emily had learned to navigate them, her fear tempered by necessity. She'd faced Jake's crew, not with fists, but with the weight of his name. The Iron Hawks feared Jake, his reputation for brutal retribution kept them in line. They'd pay rather than risk his wrath if she played this right. Her heart raced as she stepped onto the cracked sidewalk, the air heavy with exhaust and the distant hum of a city waking up. She felt exposed, a scholar in a war zone, but the ledger was her shield, its pages, her weapon. Her first stop was Tommy's rundown duplex, where he lounged on a sagging porch, a cigarette dangling from his lips. "Tommy," Emily said, her voice steady despite her shaking hands, "Jake sent me. You owe me $500 from last year's bail." Tommy's eyes widened, but he didn't argue. Jake's name was enough. Muttering about Jake's crazy wife, he handed over crumpled bills. His pride stung, but his fear greater. Next was Mike, holed up in a basement apartment, who coughed up $300 after glancing at the ledger's damning entry. Each house in payment chipped away at Emily's fear, replacing it with a flicker of triumph. By dusk, she'd collected $4,000, 80% of her dowry, her hands trembling not with fear now, but with the thrill of victory. She clutched the cash tightly, her pulse quickening as she imagined Jake's face when he realized she'd outmaneuvered him. But one debt lingered: Rachel's $1,000, a sum Emily suspected Jake had funneled to her for some lavish gesture. With her fake tears and sisterly bond, Rachel was the thorn in Emily's side, always at Jake's elbow, demanding more. Emily's mind flashed to rumors she'd heard Jake renting a dance hall for Rachel's birthday, ordering a 2-tier cake from downtown. The thought twisted her gut, not with jealousy but clarity. Rachel wasn't just a sister, but a leech draining Emily's life as much as Jake did. She wouldn't confront Rachel yet, that would come later when the time was right. For now, Emily headed to the bank, the South Side's only branch, its neon sign flickering in the twilight. She deposited the $4,000. The teller's nod validated her courage. Her heart swelled with relief and defiance. She'd taken the first step to breaking free. As she walked home, the streets buzzing with the Iron Hawks' usual chaos, shouts, revving motorcycles, the clink of bottles, Emily felt a shift inside her. The ledger had given her power not just over her money, but over her future. Jake might rule the streets, but she'd learned to wield his influence against him. Her parents' voices echoed in her mind, their lessons about resilience and intellect over violence. She wasn't fighting Jake's way, she was fighting smarter. Her chest ached with the weight of her lost dreams, but a fire burned brighter now, fueled by the cash in her account and the knowledge that she could outwit the man who'd underestimated her. This wasn't just about money, it was about proving she was no longer his pawn. The Chicago dusk painted the sky in bruised purples as Emily sat at the wobbly kitchen table in their rented apartment, her fingers tracing the edge of a chipped coffee mug. The $4,000 she'd reclaimed from Jake's Iron Hawks crew was safely in the bank, a small victory that steadied her racing heart. But the weight of Rachel's unpaid $1,000 debt lingered like a storm cloud. Emily's mind churned with memories of Jake's lavish spending on his so-called sister a two-tier birthday cake, a rented dance hall while she scraped by on her teacher's salary. Her chest tightened with a mix of anger and resolve. She'd spent 2 years funding Jake's gang, but now after her near-fatal car crash a year ago, she saw clearly she wasn't just fighting for money, but for her dignity. The door creaked open and Jake shuffled in his leather jacket slung over one shoulder, carrying 2 greasy takeout bags from Lucky's Diner. His crooked grin, once charming, now grated on Emily's nerves. "Hey, Em figured you hadn't eaten," he said, setting the bags down. "Got your favorites, fried chicken and mashed potatoes." Emily's jaw clenched. The lie stung. "Those are Rachel's favorites, Jake," she said, her voice low but sharp. "I grew up on my mom's grilled veggies and shrimp. You'd know that if you ever paid attention." Jake froze, his grin faltering, and for a moment Emily saw a flicker of guilt in his dark eyes. Her heart ached not for love, but for the years she'd wasted hoping he'd care. He awkwardly rubbed the back of his neck, then pushed on with his usual bravado. "Look, Em, we're short on cash. Rachel got discharged today and threw a big dinner for the Hawks at Lucky's to celebrate. The bill's still open, and the dance hall from her birthday party needs paying too. Her deadbeat husband Zach doesn't give her a dime. Can you cover it? Just a few hundred." Emily's pulse quickened, her anger simmering. Jake's words were a script she'd heard too many times. His brothers always came first, and she was expected to foot the bill. But this time she wasn't the compliant wife who'd empty her savings for his crew. The Iron Hawks might rule the South Side with their protection rackets and street deals, but Emily had learned to wield Jake's feared name like a blade. She reached into her purse and pulled out a fresh copy of her ledger, the original still in pieces from Jake's rage. Sliding it across the table, she tapped the entry for Rachel's $1,000 debt. "She owes me this from last year," Emily said, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. "No more money until she pays up." Jake's face darkened, his jaw twitching as he leaned forward, towering over her. "What is this, Em? You're keeping tabs on my brothers now, Rachel's family. You can't be this petty." His voice was a low growl, but Emily didn't flinch. Her heart pounded with fear and defiance, but she held his gaze. "Petty," she said, her tone icy. "You haven't brought a dollar home in 2 years, Jake. My salary pays for this apartment, your parents' bills, everything. Rachel wants to party. She can pay her way, or you can, since you're so loyal." Jake's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Emily braced for an outburst. The Iron Hawks leader wasn't used to being challenged, especially not in his home, but she pressed on, her voice cutting through the tension. "I've got copies of that ledger, Jake. If Rachel doesn't pay in 3 days, I'll go to Zach and collect. He's her husband, let him deal with it." The mention of Zach, Rachel's abusive spouse, made Jake's face twitch with discomfort. He knew Zach's temper, knew the chaos it would unleash if Emily involved him. Rachel, always playing the victim, had borrowed that $1,000, claiming it was for medical bills after one of Zach's beatings, but Emily had heard whispers of her spending it on designer clothes and club nights. The betrayal stung, but also fueled her resolve. She wouldn't let Rachel's manipulations drain her anymore. Jake slammed his fist on the table, the takeout bags toppling. "You're too damn calculating, Emily," he roared, snatching the ledger and tearing it in half. The pages fluttered to the floor, but Emily's heart didn't waver. She stood, her hands steady now, and met his glare. "Tear it up all you want," she said coolly. "I've got more copies. And I'm no longer paying for Rachel's parties or your gang's loyalty." The air crackled with tension, Jake's breathing heavy, his fists clenched. Emily's mind flashed to the car crash the moment she'd woken up in the hospital, and she vowed to stop being Jake's pawn. That vow gave her strength, now a fire in her chest that burned away her fear. She wasn't just fighting for $1,000, she was fighting for her freedom. Jake grabbed his jacket and stormed out the door, slamming behind him. Emily sank back into her chair, her body trembling with adrenaline, but her spirit soaring. She'd stood her ground, something the old Emily, blinded by love, could never have done. The South Side streets outside buzzed with the Iron Hawks' usual chaos, motorcycles revving, voices shouting. But Emily felt a quiet power inside. She'd reclaimed most of her dowry, and now she'd drawn a line with Rachel's debt. Her parents' lessons about resilience echoed in her mind. Fight with your mind, not your fists, as she gathered the torn ledger pieces a plan formed. Rachel and Jake thought they could bully her into submission, but they'd underestimated her. This was only the beginning. The Chicago night pressed against the apartment's thin walls, the distant roar of motorcycles and shouts from the south side streets filtering through the cracked windows. Emily stood in the cramped living room, her heart hammering as she clutched her bandaged arms still sore from yesterday's confrontation. The torn ledger pieces lay scattered on the floor, a testament to Jake's rage when she'd demanded Rachel repay her $1,000 debt. 3 days had passed since she'd issued her ultimatum. Rachel had until tonight to pay, or Emily would take the matter to Zach, Rachel's volatile husband. Her stomach churned with a mix of fear and defiance. The Iron Hawks. Jake's gang ruled this neighborhood, with fear, their protection rackets, and drug deals a constant undercurrent of violence. But Emily was done being their silent financier. Her near-fatal car crash a year ago had rewired her. She wasn't the docile wife anymore, but a woman ready to fight for her freedom. The door slammed open and Jake stormed in, his leather jacket scuffed, his eyes blazing with fury. Behind him trailed Rachel, her red dress flashy against the drab apartment, her smirk as sharp as a knife. "You think you can threaten us, Emily?" Jake growled, his voice low and dangerous. He tossed a shattered thermos onto the table, its glass rim glinting ominously. Rachel stepped forward, her arms crossed, her tone dripping with mockery. "Jake told me about your little ledger stunt, going to my husband. Really, you're out of your depth, bookworm." Emily's heart pounded, but she held her ground, her resolve steeled by the memory of her hospital bed where she'd vowed to stop letting Jake and his brothers bleed her dry. "You owe me $1,000, Rachel," Emily said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "You borrowed it for medical bills, but I know it went to your club nights and fancy dresses. Pay up or I'll talk to Zach tomorrow." Rachel's smirk faltered, her eyes darting to Jake, who clenched his fists. The air crackled with tension, the Iron Hawk's influence looming like a shadow. Jake's crew wasn't just a gang, they were a family forged in the South Side's grit, loyal to Jake's charisma and fists. But Emily had learned to wield his name, and she wasn't backing down. "You're embarrassing me in front of my brothers," Jake snapped, stepping closer, his bulk towering over her. "You don't get to call the shots here." Before Emily could respond, Jake's anger erupted. He grabbed the thermos and hurled it to the floor, the glass shattering with a deafening crash. Boiling water splashed across Emily's legs, exposed beneath her skirt, searing her skin. Pain shot through her, a dozen cuts opening as glass shards bit into her flesh. She gasped, clutching her scalded arm, her vision blurring with tears. But even as her body screamed, her mind stayed sharp, fueled by a fire kindled in that hospital room. Rachel seized the moment, clutching her arm and shrieking, "Jake, I'm hurt!" Her theatrics were blatant, and Emily's injuries dwarfed a small blister on her skin. Jake spun to her, his face softening with concern, but Emily's voice cut through like steel. "You threw it, Jake," she said, her jaw clenched against the pain. "Why should I apologize for your mess?" Jake's eyes widened, caught off guard by her defiance. "Apologize to Rachel," he roared, blaming Emily for the chaos. "She wouldn't be hurt if you hadn't started this fight over money," Rachel played along, her eyes glinting with triumph. "You dragged me into this, Emily. You owe me." Emily's heart raced, a mix of agony and fury coursing through her. She straightened, ignoring the blood trickling down her legs. "I didn't do a damn thing," she said, her voice cold. "You want an apology? Pay your debt first." Rachel's face flushed, her smugness cracking, and she looked to Jake for rescue. He raised his hand, his face twisted with rage, ready to strike. Emily's breath caught her body tensing, but she stared him down unflinching. "Lay one finger on me, Jake, and I'll report you to the police," she said, her tone icy. "You think your buddies at the station will save you from the shame of your wife dragging you in?" Jake froze his hand, hovering, his pride warring with her words. He knew the South Side's gossip mill would eat him alive, a gang leader reported by his wife. The Iron Hawks thrived on his untouchable image, and Emily's threat struck its heart. Sensing the shift, Rachel whined, "Jake, are you just going to let her talk to you like that?" But Emily cut her off, her voice rising. "You're not his sister, Rachel. You're a married woman leeching off my money. If you're so loyal, settle your debt." The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging heavy. Jake lowered his hand, his face a storm of anger and uncertainty. Emily's legs throbbed, her arm burned, but her spirit soared. She'd faced Jake's violence and Rachel's manipulation and come out standing. Without another word, Jake grabbed Rachel's arm and stormed out the door, slamming behind them. Emily sank to the floor, her body shaking with pain and adrenaline. Blood and water pooled around her, but she felt a strange clarity. The crash that had nearly killed her had taught her to fight smarter, not harder. She wasn't just surviving Jake's world, she was dismantling it. Her parents' lessons about resilience echoed in her mind, steadying her. Rachel's debt, Jake's rage, they were cracks in his armor, and Emily would pry them open. As she bandaged her cuts with trembling hands, a plan took shape. She'd make them pay not just in dollars, but in consequences. The air in the Chicago apartment was thick with the acrid scent of spilled coffee and broken glass remnants of Jake's violent outburst. Emily stood in the dim living room, her legs stinging from the scalding water, and cuts her arm throbbing beneath a makeshift bandage. Her heart pounded a wild mix of pain and defiance as she faced the wreckage of her marriage. The Iron Hawks. Jake's gang ruled the South Side with an iron grip protection rackets, drug deals, and street brawls were their currency, and Jake's charisma held it all together. But Emily was no longer a bystander in their world. The car crash a year ago, caused by a rival's revenge, had shattered her illusions, leaving her with a vow to reclaim her life. Rachel's unpaid $1,000 debt, a symbol of Jake's betrayal, was the line she'd drawn, and she wouldn't back down. The door burst open, and Jake stormed in again, his face a mask of rage, Rachel trailing behind in her garish red dress. Her smugness radiated like a neon sign, as if she'd caught Emily in some grand scandal. "Can you push us around with your little book?" Rachel sneered, pointing to the torn ledger pieces on the floor. "Jake's the boss here, not you." Emily's pulse raced, but her resolve, forged in the hospital's sterile silence, held firm. She met Rachel's gaze, her voice cold. "You owe me $1,000, Rachel. Pay it, or I'll go to Zach tomorrow. He's your husband, let him sort it out." Rachel's smirk faltered, her eyes flicking to Jake, who loomed over Emily, his fists clenched. "You're making a scene, Em," he growled. "This stops now." Emily's heart thundered, but she didn't flinch. The Iron Hawk's power relied on Jake's untouchable image, and she knew how to weaponize it. "A scene," she said, her tone sharp. "You're the one who threw the thermos, Jake. You're the one who's been draining my dowry for your brothers. Rachel wants to play with her family. She can pay her share." Rachel's face flushed, and she stepped closer, her voice venomous. "You don't get it, Emily. Jake's loyal to us, not some uptight teacher. You're nothing compared to the Hawks." The words cut deep, but Emily's pain fueled her fire. She turned to Jake, her eyes blazing. "If Rachel's your family, then cover her debt yourself. I'm done bankrolling your gang." Jake's face twisted with fury, and he raised his arm, ready to strike. Emily's breath caught her body tensing, but she stood tall, her voice cutting through the tension. "Hit me, Jake, and I'll report you. Your police buddies won't save you from the shame of your wife dragging you to the station." His hand froze, his pride warring with her threat. The South Side thrived on gossip, and a scandal like this would gut his reputation. Sensing his hesitation, Rachel whined, "Jake, she's humiliating you. Make her apologize." But Emily was done playing their game. She grabbed a stack of divorce papers from the table prepared in secret after her crash and threw them at Jake's feet. "I want a divorce," she said, her voice steady, each word a hammer blow. "I'm not your ATM anymore." Jake's eyes widened, disbelief flashing across his face. "Divorce? Em, what the hell? I've treated you well. I never hit you." His voice cracked, a rare glimpse of vulnerability, but Emily's heart was stone. Rachel chimed in, her tone sickly sweet. "Emily, you're so lucky. A man like Jake, loyal, strong, doesn't even hit his wife." "You won't find better." Emily laughed, a bitter sound that echoed in the room. "Not hitting me doesn't make you a good husband, Jake. If Rachel's your priority, marry her. She's dying for it." Rachel's face turned beet red, her pout directed at Jake. "Are you just gonna let her talk to me like that? We're family." Jake's fury reignited, his hand lashing out before he could stop himself. The slap stung Emily's cheek, leaving a bright red mark. For a moment, shock silenced the room. Jake's eyes widened, panic replacing rage. I'm sorry I lost it," he stammered, stepping toward her. But Emily's pain ignited her courage. She raised her hand and slapped him back the force, snapping his head to the side. Rachel gasped, lunging at Emily, but Emily swung a backhand, catching Rachel's cheek. Rachel shrieked, clutching her face, and charged again, but Jake grabbed her, holding her back. "Enough," he roared, his voice torn between anger and shame. Emily clutched her burning cheek, her eyes locked on them. "You want an apology, Rachel? Tell me what I said wrong. Does not hitting me make Jake a saint? If that's your idea of a good man, you pick losers." She turned to Jake, her voice cold as ice. You cherish her so much, let her divorce Zach and take you. Stop hiding behind family. Rachel's face contorted with humiliation, and she stormed out fuming. Jake hesitated, his eyes pleading, but Emily's gaze was unrelenting. Get out, she said. He grabbed his jacket and left the door slamming behind him. Emily sank to the floor, her body trembling with pain and adrenaline, but her spirit soared. The slap had hurt, but it had also freed her. She wasn't the scared girl who'd married Jake, she was a woman who'd survived his world and was ready to leave it. Her parents' lessons about strength rang in her ears. Rachel's debt, Jake's violence, they were fuel for her rebellion. She'd make them face the consequences, not just for her money, but for her dignity. The morning in Chicago was gray. The south side streets were slick with rain, and Emily hobbled to a nearby clinic, her legs and arms still raw from the thermos incident. Each step sent a jolt of pain through her, but her heart burned with a fierce determination. The slap from Jake, the sting of Rachel's taunts, and the $1,000 debt Rachel owed were no longer just personal betrayals, they fueled her rebellion. The Iron Hawks. Jake's gang ruled this neighborhood with a mix of charm and violence, their protection rackets and drug deals casting a long shadow. But Emily, reshaped by the car crash that nearly killed her a year ago, was no longer their victim. That hospital bed had been her crucible, forging a vow to reclaim her life. With divorce papers filed and $4,000 of her dowry secured, she was ready to turn the tables. At the clinic, Emily sat in a sterile waiting room, her bandages fresh, but her mind racing. The South Side's gossip mill buzzed with Jake's exploits, beating Rachel's husband Zach for abusing her, renting a dance hall for her birthday. Emily's stomach churned, not with jealousy, but clarity. Rachel wasn't just Jake's sister, but a manipulator draining her life. As the doctor checked her wounds, a man approached. Zach Walker, Rachel's husband, his lanky frame and wire-rimmed glasses starkly contrasting to the Iron Hawk's swagger. Emily, right, he said, his voice low, his eyes weary. Heard you're stirring things up with Jake. Emily's pulse quickened, but she nodded, sensing an opportunity. I'm done letting them walk over me, she said, her tone firm. You should be too. Zach sat across from her, his hands fidgeting. Rachel's been using Jake for years, he said bitterly. She's not some victim. She bragged at the club about sleeping with every decent-looking guy in the Hawks except Jake. Says he's her challenge. She even gave me an STD. His voice cracked, tears welling in his eyes. Emily's heart twisted with a mix of shock and vindication. She'd suspected Rachel's duplicity, but this confirmed it. Zach's pain mirrored her own, a spouse betrayed by the Iron Hawk's twisted loyalty. She's bleeding me dry too, Emily said, her voice softening. That $1,000 she owes me, it's my dowry, not Jake's, to give away. Zach's jaw clenched. When we married, my family gave her $600. I want it back and I want out. Emily's mind sparked with a plan, her hospital-born resolve sharpening into cunning. Zach helped me expose them, and I'll make sure you get your $600 and your divorce, she said, her eyes steady. Rachel's playing Jake, and he's too proud to see it. Let's make them face the consequences. Zach hesitated, then nodded, his anger matching her resolve. What's the plan? He asked. Emily leaned in, her voice low. Jake's obsessed with his reputation. If we catch him and Rachel crossing a line publicly, he'll lose face with the Hawks. I know Rachel's habits. She's at the clubs every night, and Jake's always there to save her. We'll set them up. Zach's eyes gleamed with a mix of hope and vengeance. I'm in. Emily's heart raced as they hashed out details. Zach would tip her off when Rachel and Jake were together, likely at a seedy club like the Rusty Nail where the Hawks partied. Emily would bring Jake's family, his mother, a fierce woman who distrusted Rachel, to witness their betrayal. The South Side thrived on reputation, and Jake's power depended on his untouchable image. A scandal would unravel him. Emily's hands trembled, not with fear, but with anticipation. She wasn't just fighting for her dowry, Rachel's debt and freedom. Her parents' lessons about intellect over violence echoed in her mind. She'd outsmart Jake, not outfight him. As she left the clinic, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and gleaming under streetlights. The South Side pulsed with life, car horns shouted curses, the rumble of Iron Hawk's motorcycles. Emily's injuries throbbed, but her spirit soared. She'd spent 2 years as Jake's shadow, funding his gang while he prioritized Rachel. Now with Zach as her ally, she held the upper hand. Rachel's $1,000 debt was a loose end she'd tie up, but more than that, she'd expose the lie of their family bond. Her heart, once heavy with betrayal, now beat with purpose. She wasn't just surviving, she was orchestrating Jake's downfall, which felt like justice. The Chicago apartment smelled of stale coffee and rain-soaked carpet, starkly contrasting with the fire burning in Emily's chest as she prepared dinner. Her legs still ached from the thermos incident, but her heart thrummed purposefully. The $4,000 she'd reclaimed from Jake's Ironhawks crew was safe in the bank, but Rachel's $1,000 debt remained a thorn in her side. Emily's alliance with Zach, Rachel's betrayed husband, had lit a path forward, a plan to expose Jake and Rachel's tangled bond and unravel their hold over her life. The Ironhawks ruled the South Side with fists, and fear their protection rackets and drug deals cementing Jake's status as a local legend. But Emily, reborn in the clarity of her near-fatal car crash a year ago, was no longer their pawn. She'd wield her intellect like a weapon tonight, turning Jake's pride against him. She set the table with care, grilling vegetables and shrimp, her favorites, not Rachel's, her hands steady despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. She'd sent word through a mutual friend for Jake to come home for dinner, a calculated move to catch him off guard. The door creaked open and Jake stepped in his leather jacket, damp from the drizzle, his eyes wary but softened by the aroma of food. This smells great," he said, a hesitant grin breaking through. "You're finally acting like a real wife." Emily's heart stung at the condescension, but she masked it with a polite smile, her resolve unshaken. "I've been thinking, Jake," she said, her voice gentle, "about Rachel. She's always in trouble, and I think it's because she's trapped in a bad marriage. I heard Zach won't let her go unless she repays the $600 dowry his family gave her." Jake's fork paused midair, his brow furrowing. 600? That's steep." Emily nodded, her tone measured. "She's your childhood friend. You can't let her stay miserable. I was thinking sell your motorcycle. It's worth enough to cover her $600 and maybe help us around the house." Jake's eyes widened, his prized bike, a gleaming black Harley symbolizing his Iron Hawk's status, his Achilles heel. "Sell my bike," he said, his voice tight. "I use it every day, Em." Emily's heart raced, but she kept her expression soft, hiding the cunning beneath. She knew he'd resist, but she'd planned for an interruption. As if on cue, the door swung open and Rachel burst in, her eyes red with crocodile tears, her red dress clinging to her frame. "Jake, I was listening outside," she cried, her voice trembling for effect. "You said you'd do anything for me. Zach's gonna kill me if I don't get out of this marriage. Please, sell the bike." Her performance was flawless, preying on Jake's pride as the Hawks' leader, a man who never backed down from his family. Emily's stomach twisted with disgust and triumph. She'd counted on Rachel's greed to push him. Jake's face darkened, his jaw clenched as he looked between the two women. The South Side thrived on reputation, and Rachel's plea in front of Emily was a public challenge he couldn't ignore. "Fine," Jake growled, slamming his plate down. "I'll sell the damn bike." Emily's heart soared, a silent victory. The next day, the Harley was gone, sold for $1,500. True to their deal, Zach got his $600 and signed the divorce papers, his gratitude palpable. He met Emily at a diner, sliding an envelope across the table. "Here's your $1,000, he said, his voice gruff. "Rachel's debt was paid in full. Thanks for helping me get free." Emily's hands trembled as she took the money, and her dowry was now complete at $5,000. The weight of 2 years of betrayal lifted slightly, replaced by a surge of empowerment. She'd outsmarted Rachel, using her manipulation to secure the repayment. Back at the apartment, Jake paced, his mood sour from losing his bike. He said that Rachel's been clinging to me, testing her reaction. "You're not upset?" Emily forced a warm smile, her heart steady despite the lie. "I was too jealous before," she said. "I know you see her as family. As your wife, I should be more understanding." Jake's eyes lit up, his ego soothed. "That's my girl," he said, clapping her shoulder before rushing to meet Rachel, oblivious to Emily's plan. Her smile faded as the door closed, her mind racing. With Zach's help, she'd soon catch them in a compromising moment, exposing their family bond as a sham. The Iron Hawk's loyalty was Jake's strength, but his blind trust in Rachel was his weakness. Emily stood alone, the apartment quiet, except for the hum of the city outside. Her injuries still throbbed, but her spirit was alight with purpose. Her parents' lessons about resilience echoed. She was fighting with strategy, not fists. Rachel's debt was settled, but the real prize was freedom. She'd turned Jake's pride and Rachel's greed against them, and the next step would shatter their world. Her heart, once heavy with pain, now beat with anticipation. She wasn't just reclaiming her money, she was rewriting her future. The Chicago night pulsed with the South Side's restless energy. Neon lights flickered over dive bars, and the rumble of Ironhawk's motorcycles echoed through the streets. Emily stood in her cramped apartment, her heart pounding with anticipation and resolve. Her injuries from Jake's thermos outburst still ached, but her spirit was alight with purpose. She'd outsmarted Jake and Rachel, manipulating him into selling his prized Harley to secure Rachel's $1,000 debt paid back through Zach, her now divorced ally. The $5,000 of her dowry was safe in the bank, a symbol of her reclaimed power. But Emily wasn't done. The Iron Hawks Jake's gang ruled this neighborhood with protection rackets and drug deals, their loyalty tied to Jake's untouchable image. Tonight, with Zach's help, she'd shatter that image, exposing Jake and Rachel's betrayal to secure her freedom. Emily's plan was meticulous, born from the clarity of her near-fatal car crash a year ago when she'd vowed to escape Jake's world. She'd encouraged Jake to spend more time with Rachel, feigning understanding to lower his guard. "You're right to help her through her divorce," she'd told him, her voice warm, masking the strategy beneath. Jake, basking in her approval, had rushed to Rachel's side, oblivious to the trap. Zach, burning with resentment over Rachel's infidelity, had become Emily's eyes on the streets. He'd tipped her off that night. Jake and Rachel were drinking heavily at the Rusty Nail, a seedy club where the Hawks partied. They're headed to a hotel. Zach texted, his words clipped with anger. "Room 204, the Starlight Inn." Emily's heart raced, a surge of vindication washing over her. This was the moment she'd been building toward. She gathered Jake's family, his mother Linda, a fierce woman who'd never trusted Rachel, and his father Carl, a retired mechanic with a short temper. "We need to see what Jake's doing," Emily said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Linda's eyes narrowed. "That girl's trouble," she muttered, grabbing her coat. The drive to the Starlight Inn was tense, the South Side's gritty streets blurring past. Emily's mind flashed to her hospital bed where she'd sworn to fight with intellect, not fists. Her parents' lessons about resilience steadied her. Now she wasn't seeking revenge, but justice. The Iron Hawks thrived on Jake's reputation, and a public scandal would gut it, forcing him to agree to the divorce she'd demanded. At the hotel, a rundown dive with flickering neon signs, Emily led the group to room 204. Her heart thundered as Zach, waiting in the lobby, nodded grimly. "They're in there," he whispered. Emily knocked her hand firm, and Carl kicked the door open when no one answered. The sight inside was a punch to the gut. Jake and Rachel tangled on the bedclothes strewn across the floor, the air heavy with whiskey and betrayal. Rachel shrieked, pulling a sheet over herself, while Jake scrambled upright, his face pale with panic. "It's not what it looks like," he stammered, but Linda's hand cracked across Rachel's face twice, her voice venomous. "You tramp, I knew you'd ruin my boy." Carl grabbed Jake by the collar, his fist slamming into his son's side. "You disgrace," he roared. Emily stood back, her heart pounding with triumph and sorrow. The South Side's gossip mill would devour this Jake, the Iron Hawks' fearless leader, caught with his sister in a sleazy hotel. His reputation, his power crumbled in that moment. Rachel's eyes darted to Emily, filled with rage, but Emily met her gaze unflinching. "Jake," she said, her voice cold as steel. "We're done. Sign the divorce papers." Jake's eyes pleaded, his voice hoarse. Let me explain." But Emily cut him off. "You've explained enough. I'm a neat freak, Jake. I don't want a dirty man." The words landed like a blade, slicing through his pride. Linda, tears streaming down her face, nodded at Emily. "Get out of this, girl. You deserve better." Jake slumped, defeated, his head bowed. The scandal was too public, his shame too deep. "Fine," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "I'll sign." Emily's heart soared, a weight lifted from her chest. She'd won not just her freedom, but her dignity. Zach handed her an envelope with the remaining $500 from the motorcycle sale, a final gesture of their alliance. "You did it," he said, his voice gruff but grateful. Emily nodded, her hands steady now, the money symbolizing her reclaimed life. As they left the hotel, the South Side's chaos, shouts, sirens, the hum of the city faded into the background. Emily's injuries still throbbed, but her spirit was free. Her parents' teachings echoed, "Fight smart, not hard." She'd turned Jake's pride and Rachel's greed against them, and now she was walking away. The Atlanta sun blazed over the bustling streets, starkly contrasting the gray shadows of Chicago's South Side, where Emily had left behind a life of betrayal. With her divorce from Jake finalized and $5,500 in hand, her reclaimed dowry, plus the motorcycle sale money, she'd quit her substitute teaching job and moved south, chasing a fresh start. The weight of the Iron Hawks, Jake's gang, no longer pressed on her. Once a constant threat, their protection rackets and drug deals were a fading memory. The car crash a year ago, caused by a rival's revenge, had awakened her resolve, and exposing Jake and Rachel's scandal had freed her. Now standing in a small storefront she'd rented in Atlanta's growing downtown, Emily's heart thrummed with nervous excitement and hope. This was her chance to rebuild, not just survive. She'd poured her savings into a small commodity business selling trendy accessories, headbands, earrings, socks, and hats, riding the 1980s economic boom. The South Side had taught her resilience, but Atlanta offered opportunity, its markets alive with shoppers hungry for affordable style. Emily's hands trembled as she arranged displays, her mind flashing to the years she'd spent funding Jake's gang. Each sale, each jingle of the cash register felt like a reclaiming of her dreams. Her parents' lessons about perseverance echoed. She was fighting with her mind, building a future from the ashes of her past. Yet beneath her determination, a quiet fear lingered. Could she truly leave the pain behind? Her first months were grueling, working late to stock shelves and charm customers, but the business thrived. Emily's knack for spotting trends, bright scrunchies, bold earrings drew crowds, and her warm smile masked the scars of Chicago. Once heavy with betrayal, her heart began to lighten, each profit a step toward independence. Then came the Atlanta floods. A deluge swamped the city and tested her resolve. When news reports showed soldiers wading through knee-deep water, their feet raw from days of relief work, Emily's heart ached. She'd known hardship, but this was different, a chance to give back. Without hesitation, she donated her socks and slippers to the relief effort, driving to the command post herself. The act wasn't just charity, but a declaration of her new self, a woman who chose purpose over pain. At the relief site, amid crates and muddy boots, Emily handed boxes to a young officer, his face familiar despite the years. "Andrew Foster?" she asked, her voice catching. He grinned, his hazel eyes warm, starkly contrasting to Jake's cold glare. Emily Carter. No way. Andrew, her high school classmate from Chicago's suburbs, was now a captain in the Army, his steady presence a balm to her frayed nerves. They'd shared chemistry classes, dreaming of becoming scientists before life separated them. "Thought you'd be in a lab by now," he teased, helping her unload. Emily laughed, the sound foreign after years of tension. "And you a soldier? What happened to our Nobel Prize?" Andrew's chuckle was easy, his kindness disarming. "Life had other plans," he said, his gaze lingering with a gentleness that stirred her heart. Over coffee at a relief tent, they swapped stories. Andrew spoke of his Army service, his voice steady but his eyes haunted by the weight of duty. He said, "I joined to make a difference, but seeing so much need is tough." Emily shared her escape from Jake, her words halting initially, then flowing as Andrew listened without judgment. He said, "You're stronger than you know," his hand brushing hers, a spark igniting in her chest. Unlike Jake's flashy charisma, Andrew's quiet strength felt like home. Scarred by betrayal, her heart began to open, a flicker of hope replacing the fear she'd carried. They parted with a promise to meet again, Andrew's number scrawled on a napkin, a lifeline to something new. Emily returned to her shop, her spirit lifted. The floods receded, but her connection with Andrew grew, their calls a bright spot in her busy days. Her business expanded with new stores opening in nearby cities, each success a testament to her resilience. The South Side's chaos felt distant, but Emily carried its lessons. Never again would she let anyone drain her. Her heart, once shattered, now beat with purpose and possibility. Andrew's kindness, so different from Jake's ego, hinted at a future she hadn't dared imagine. Emily felt alive as she locked up her shop, the Atlanta skyline glowing under the stars. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving, and her story was far from over. The Atlanta sunrise bathed the city in golden light, casting a warm glow over the sprawling wholesale market Emily had built on the city's outskirts. 3 months after reconnecting with Andrew Foster during the flood relief effort, Emily stood in her small office, her heart full of a quiet joy she hadn't known in years. Her escape from Chicago's South Side, where the Iron Hawks' protection rackets and Jake's betrayals had nearly broken her, felt like a distant nightmare. A year ago, the car crash broke her resolve, and exposing Jake and Rachel's scandal secured her freedom. Now, with $500 from her dowry and the motorcycle sale, Emily had transformed her pain into purpose, her accessory shops thriving across Georgia. But her marriage to Andrew, registered in a simple courthouse ceremony, anchored her new life. Once scarred by Jake's ego, her heart beats with love and possibility. Andrew, a captain in the army, had handed over his savings, $30,000 from years of service, with a trust that contrasted sharply with Jake's demands. Build something big, he'd said, his hazel eyes steady, his voice warm with belief in her. Unlike Jake's flashy charisma, Andrew's quiet strength was rooted in kindness and duty. They'd rekindled their high school connection over late-night calls, sharing dreams of science they'd abandoned and new goals forged in hardship. "You're not just surviving," Andrew told her one night, his hand squeezing hers. "You're creating." Emily's chest swelled with gratitude, her fear of betrayal fading in his presence. Their wedding, attended by a few army friends, and her shop staff, was simple but joyful, a promise of partnership, not possession. With their combined savings, Emily bought a plot of land and opened Atlanta's first wholesale market for small goods, headbands, earrings, socks, and more. She divided it into over 100 stalls, prioritizing military families struggling financially, a nod to Andrew's service. Her heart raced as she handed out leases, seeing hope in the eyes of wives and veterans who'd been overlooked. The market buzzed from day one, vendors selling trendy accessories to eager crowds, the air alive with chatter and the clink of coins. Emily's network, built through her shops, drew merchants who trusted her vision. Her parents' lessons about resilience echoed. She was fighting with her mind, creating opportunity where Jake had only taken. When the Atlanta floods hit again, Emily's market became a hub for relief. She rallied her vendors, her voice steady despite the chaos, organizing donations of hot soup, blankets, and tents for soldiers on the levees. Andrew worked beside her, coordinating with his unit, and his calm leadership was a steadying force. "You're a natural, he said, his smile proud as they handed out supplies. Emily's heart soared, not just for his words, but for the community they were building. Her staff, primarily young women from tough backgrounds, pushed her toward Andrew one evening, giggling. "He saved our city," they teased. "You owe him a wife." Andrew blushed, laughing. "I'll take her." Emily's cheeks warmed, her love for him deepening. Unlike Jake's empty promises, Andrew's actions spoke of commitment. The market's success rippled outward, stimulating Atlanta's economy. Laid-off workers found jobs hauling goods with tricycles, vendors expanded their businesses, and families gained stability. The Army awarded Emily a certificate as a model military spouse, a moment that brought tears to her eyes. Standing on the market stage, accepting the honor, she felt the weight of her past lift. Chicago's violence, bricks through windows, Rachel's taunts, was a shadow compared to this light. Andrew stood in the crowd, his applause louder than anyone's, his pride a quiet strength she leaned into. Her heart, once heavy with betrayal, now overflowed with purpose. She wasn't just a businesswoman, she was a catalyst for change. At home, their small apartment was filled with laughter and plans. Andrew shared stories of his deployments, his voice soft but honest about the toll of service. Emily opened up about her years with Jake, her words no longer halting, trusting Andrew's empathy. They dreamed of a family, of balancing her market with his career. Her shops grew, and new locations opened in Savannah and Macon, each success a testament to her resilience. The South Side's chaos had taught her to fight smart, and Atlanta had given her the chance to thrive. As she locked up the market one night, Andrew was waiting in his truck, and Emily felt a peace she'd never known. Her life was hers now, built on love and legacy, not sacrifice. The Atlanta wholesale market hummed under the midday sun, its stalls bustling with vendors and shoppers, a testament to Emily's transformation. Years after escaping Chicago's South Side, where the Iron Hawks' protection rackets and Jake's betrayals had nearly destroyed her, Emily stood at the heart of her empire. Her $500 dowry, reclaimed through cunning and courage, had grown into a network of accessory shops and a thriving market, employing military families and fueling Atlanta's economy. Her marriage to Andrew Foster, the kind-hearted Army captain who'd rekindled her hope during the floods, anchored her new life. Their one-year-old twins giggled in their stroller, Andrew's steady hand pushing them, as Emily collected rent, her heart swelling with a peace hard-won after her near-fatal car crash had awakened her resolve. A trip to Chicago's suburbs to visit her parents' graves brought Emily back to her roots, and the quiet streets were in stark contrast with the chaos on the highways. Her heart ached with nostalgia and pride. She'd turned pain into purpose. One day, a familiar figure caught her eye at the market, Jake, a shadow of the Iron Hawks' once charismatic leader. His left arm was gone, severed in a nightclub brawl, and he pedaled a battered tricycle with one hand, begging for delivery work. "Need a haul, boss." He called, "I'll do it for $1, less." His voice hollow. When he saw Emily, panic flashed in his eyes. He twisted the handlebars and sped off his gaunt frame, a ghost of the man she'd married. Her heart twinged not with pity, but with the weight of their shared past. Word on the streets pieced together Jake's fall. After their divorce, Rachel had pursued him, eager to replace Emily. But Jake, knowing her history of sleeping around the Hawks, refused to marry her. She's a brother, not a wife, he'd said, his pride intact, despite the scandal Emily had orchestrated. Rachel returned to her old ways, partying, causing club drama, and dragging Jake into fights. One night, defending her at the Rusty Nail, a rival's knife took his arm. A government crackdown soon shuttered the Southside's nightclubs, disbanding the Hawks. Broke and disabled, Jake reluctantly married Rachel, hoping for stability. But his loyalty to his brothers persisted. He lent money he didn't have, sold Rachel's clothes to treat them, his ego fed by their praise. Rachel, craving luxury, couldn't tolerate Jake's generosity. Their fights escalated, and she took a job at a KTV lounge, selling drinks and more to clients. Jake caught her with a new boss, a brutal fight leaving him half dead. Divorced again, Jake spiraled, jobless, armless, alone. Years later, drunk and broken, he'd snapped. At a KTV, Rachel mocked his poverty, calling him a washed-up thug. In a rage, Jake grabbed a fruit knife and stabbed her 18 times. She died on the spot, and he was sentenced to death. Emily learned this from whispers in Chicago, her heart heavy but unsurprised. Jake's choices had built his prison just as hers had built her freedom. Back at her parents' graves, Jake's parents approached, their faces lined with grief. They handed Emily a wrinkled envelope, Jake's final letter before his execution. Standing beside her, his eyes soft with concern, Andrew asked, "Want to read it?" Emily shook her head, her heart steady. She tossed the envelope into a fire pit, watching flames consume the last trace of Jake. No sorrow lingered, only peace. The car crash had given her a second chance, not for revenge, but redemption. Her parents' teachings about resilience had guided her, and Andrew's love had grounded her. Their twins laughed, chasing fireflies as the wind rustled through the cemetery trees. Emily took Andrew's hand and promised him a promise for the next day. As they walked away, the ashes of Jake's letter scattered in the breeze. Emily's life was no longer defined by betrayal or sacrifice, but by choice and love. Her market thrived, her family grew, and her heart was whole. Andrew, her partner, squeezed her hand, his quiet strength contrasting with Jake's chaos. "You did it, Em," he said, his voice proud. She smiled, her spirit unburdened. The South Side's shadows were gone, replaced by Atlanta's light. Emily had reclaimed her dignity, freedom, and future, a legacy built not on pain but purpose.